like a game.
You know, over the years, my experience and relationship with the Xbox hasn't been the best. I'm not afraid to admit that. I hold no grudges, and I'm not a permanent ally to any side. I value honesty and quality, no matter where it comes from, and support those who offer it. Microsoft has been doing much better in recent years, and I commend them for it. I appreciate it a lot, because it helps gaming improve overall. Plus, it fosters great competition to keep everyone trying to do better themselves. In order to be thorough here, I need to explain a bit about my history with the Xbox. I'll try to be as quick as possible with it though, so that I can get to the point of this editorial. It all started with the original Xbox, while I was still but a wee teenager. I've always had an extreme passion for games, even from as young as like 5 years old. So by the time middle school rolled around, and the original Xbox was released, I was one of those kids. A lot of people claim to be the type of nerd that nobody understood, but I truly fit that bill in a lot of ways. I was the kid who spent time in class drawing Final Fantasy characters in his notebooks, and regularly had at least one gaming magazine and/or strategy guide in my backpack. Since series like Final Fantasy were exclusive to PlayStation at the time, I looked forward to the PS2 a ton, but the area where I lived was full of people who were the opposite. At the time, these kids all seemed like robots to me. They all watched Adult Swim because they thought it made them more mature, absolutely loved the Ford Mustang but hated imports, and chose to buy an Xbox over the PlayStation. I got made fun of for liking games where everyone stood in lines and took turns attacking. I was ridiculed because I played games where numbers popped out of enemies when they were damaged, rather than blood. Not asking for sympathy, of course. Not only do I not care in the slightest how much I was made fun of, because I had enough great friends with similar interests, and I wasn't afraid to fight back when criticized unfairly. But also, we were kids. Kids are cruel because they're kids. I was over it the second that I graduated from high school. But because of this, I grew to resent the Xbox for most of my younger years. To me, it was the symbol of punks who'd rather play brain-dead games like Halo than more original games like Katamari Damacy or Killer 7. Granted, I was just as wrong as they were in criticizing Xbox games for catering to the dumb popular kids and whatnot, but I had yet to even begin to understand the nuances of game design. Strangely enough, I got a GameCube before I got either of the other two competitive consoles, because it was cheaper at the time. Fast forward to high school, into the Xbox 360. This was the first console of that generation that I'd picked up. I bought it too because it was cheaper than the PS3, and because I already had access to a friend's Nintendo Wii. I figured I'd put my prejudices aside because my only other option was owning no current generation console at all. Overall, I don't regret buying a 360. I don't hate my 360, because it gave me a lot of amazing memories with its, at the time, exclusives, with games like Left 4 Dead, Halo, Mass Effect, Oblivion, Lost Odyssey, Blue Dragon, etc. But if I'm honest, it's also by far the most poorly constructed console I've ever owned, with even most of the components on my original fat PS2 outlasting it, despite probably putting 5 times the amount of playtime into said PS2. And don't get me started on how consoles like the GameCube and PS3 have held up comparatively. As of now, the disc tray on my 360 rarely opens, and when it does, it can't read discs. And these are only the latest problems. Maybe many of my issues were just bad luck. But that doesn't mean it felt okay to spend so much money on products that sometimes barely lasted a few months. I would love to play my 360 still. I would love to do more reviews with my 360, but I can't because it won't let me. I don't have the money to spare for another 360. I treat my game consoles and my games with the utmost respect because I want to be able to replay them forever. But even before the disc tray failure started, I had to step back from playing my 360 as often as I wanted to. It seemed like every time I started to play it regularly, something else went wrong. Honestly, the 360 was a disaster in a lot of ways, and not just for me. I feared from the day that I bought it that my console was a ticking time bomb. Though there were reasons to believe otherwise, which I'll get into in a moment, There wasn't a day that went by where I wasn't afraid my console would suddenly just stop working. That's not the way you want your customers to feel. One thing I've always wondered about actually, is how many units the 360 would have sold if you didn't include repeat purchases after failures. I myself know at least 6 people who've owned over 4 360s since it first released, because they continued to break. Again, to be thorough, I'll list the issues I have with my personal console. To begin, there's obviously the red ring, but the red ring actually includes a myriad of failures. Rumors circulated that, at its highest, 360 failure rates within the first 3 years of ownership were something like 85%. Not sure if that's true, but it sure does feel like it. I waited to purchase my 360 until the Falcon motherboard update was out, and I got the 20GB Pro model. This was at the very end of 2007, and was my attempt to avoid the high failure rates because Microsoft promised this new hardware would drastically lower failures. By the end of 2009, I had to send it to Microsoft because the graphics card had failed while playing Call of Duty 4 online. The graphics card failing was one of the most common failures that was supposed to be fixed with the hardware update. Luckily, the warranty period at that time was 3 years, but it took Microsoft a while to admit there were major issues and actually upgrade the warranty in the first place. It took about 2 months to get my console back. That was 2 months of gold wasted, with the only solace being that they'd given me a free 3-month card when I got the console back. Honestly, it was genuinely good service, but it didn't make the taste in my mouth any less sour, since the promise with the Falcon motherboard was that the failure rates would plummet. Fast forward 2 more years, and I had just borrowed Left 4 Dead 2 from a friend. While playing, I started to smell the horrendous stench of burning plastic nearby. The power supply was failing. For some reason, the venting on the power supply for my model was changed in a way that was extremely poor design, and tended to suck in a lot of dust that I couldn't really do anything about. It doesn't sound that bad. Power supplies are only like $20 used, right? Well, no. The Slim Model 360 was rather new at the time, which had its own power supply. No big deal, I didn't expect that power supply to be compatible anyway. And there were many, many more of them out there that were the original Fat Model power supplies anyway. A month later, I had a PS3 in my hands, and still no power supply. Why? Because Microsoft continually changed the power supply to match the power needs and efficiencies of the minor model changes over the years. And this, kids, is why we don't use external power supplies in console designs. At that time, there was something like 6 different power supplies for Fat 360s, and since Microsoft didn't want mismatched power supply / console configurations frying anything, the connectors on all of them were different. Ones for my model, when you could find one locally, were either usually in terrible shape, or were just as expensive as they were online. What were the online prices? Oh, just somewhere around $75 or so. I eventually got extremely lucky and found a matching power supply with updated venting for only $15 at a pawn shop. But still, making the power supply internal would have created a lot less hassle. Keep in mind, this is the only console power supply I've ever had fail, and it's also fair to note that Microsoft had the same problem with the original Xbox. Everyone knows the stories of people's houses being burnt down by their original Xbox power supplies. 2 consoles with power supply failures to me is unacceptable, and it still baffles me to this day that they continued to use an external power supply with the original Xbox One model, until this E3 when they announced it was integrated into the Xbox One S. But it's like they're asking for problems. So what other failures have I experienced with this console? Well, it seems to have issues with files being deleted or going corrupt with certain games. My update files for Need for Speed Pro Street always seem to go corrupt, and that game cannot be played at all once you save your file with the most recent update, unless you have that update. So basically every time I go to play it, I have to update it again, and that's a hassle, but I'll get to that a bit later. I can save files on Crackdown, but they claim corruption the second that I try to load them, and this goes for both the digital and physical versions of that game. My progress in Gears 1 always seems to disappear too, for no reason. The first time that happened was when I only had like 2 cog tags left to find. Never completed that game because of that issue. On PS3, never had a single file go corrupt. And it's not a corrupt sector on the hard drive either, because this happens on both my 20 gig and 60 gig hard drives, but I don't know what the problem is. Moving on, I have a wired controller, but though I've never rolled the cord up on it, the internals of it's still twisted, and the end connected to the controller is failing. I had to tape the shell of a pen to it like a splint to get the controller to stay on. And even still, the vibration in games had to be turned off if I used the controller, because it caused the controller to disconnect. But strangely enough, vibration only caused it to disconnect for like the first minute or two of gameplay, and then it fixed itself. Almost like it's a problem with the board and the controller or something, rather than the actual electrical connection. But, regardless, I don't use that controller anymore. My wireless controller is also a mess. The battery case fails sometimes if it's jostled, causing the controller to turn off. And yet, it still fits as tight as a brand new one. Several of my friends have had similar problems, by the way, with one of them even buying a brand new controller and the battery tray failing within a week. The controller works fine, but the stupid detachable piece of plastic that holds the batteries in won't make a proper electrical connection for some dumb reason. Seriously, a $60 controller failing because of a piece of plastic that's got nothing to do with the actual electronics. That's not okay. The right bumper on my wireless controller got stuck one day, despite the controller just sitting on a shelf since the last time I'd used it. I tried to fix it, but made it worse. The right and left bumpers are actually one piece in that controller, and I found it impossible to set properly when putting the controller back together. I now have to hit the very inside of the button for it to work. I think they changed that design eventually though, because newer controllers feel like the bumpers are separated. Meanwhile, neither of my analog sticks center anymore unless I hold back on them after taking any action, meaning my characters always like to drift up and to the left slightly. It makes things like picking small items up in Elder Scrolls or racing high-powered cars in Forza impossible. Meanwhile, again, my PS2 controller still works better, and I've honestly treated that thing like crap, and put way more time into it. Meanwhile, having treated my GameCube and PS3 controllers like gold, they're utterly perfect still, knock on wood. I've treated my 360 controller just as respectfully as my PS3 and GameCube, so why is there such a difference in how long it's lasted? I bought a play and charge kit one time because I was tired of wasting money on batteries. 3 months later, it wouldn't charge correctly and suddenly started getting extremely hot. How in the world is that okay? Another problem linked back to Need for Speed Pro Street is that my console never wants to update properly. I don't know what the issue is, but I can't update the console from the console itself. Keep in mind, neither this or the problems with correct files is an issue with the hard drive, because they persisted when I upgraded to the 60 gig hard drive. So now, in order to use Xbox Live when there's an update, I have to use a flash drive and download it from their website on a PC. It turns a 10-second update into a 10-minute one. And finally, back to the newest problem, my disk tray has slipping issues, meaning it rarely likes to open. It's a chore to switch disks, because I hate repeatedly taking the faceplate off to hit the manual eject tab. But in trying very, very carefully to fix it by soaking the plastic bands in cold water, I must have messed something up, because it doesn't even sense disks anymore. And keep in mind, I'm not at all tech dumb. I've taken apart NESs, PS2s, controllers, and all sorts of things, and fixed them just fine. I'm more than careful enough, and I don't do things that I think are too risky. I have yet to have any other console fail so regularly. The PS2 is the only one that's even close, and this is a console that my brother has spilled water on while it was powered on. I've played for thousands more hours on that than the 360. I regularly kept the controller on the messy-ass floor, I've never really worried about dusting it, and it's supposedly just as prone to failing. Why has my 360 died several times in several different ways, while the black and blue brick still keeps going? Granted, the controller for that PS2 is pretty shaky now, and I kinda had to splice a few together. I also had to refocus the laser once. But other than that, even that thing still works better, and it's an early fat model, meaning I should have gone through like 10 of them at this point if the rumors are true. Beyond my own personal problems, the 360 was also just handled really poorly by Microsoft. So let's go through the skeevy, dumb, and questionable business decisions related to the design and sales of the 360. To start, the UI has gotten rather terrible over time. You know, I remember people absolutely trashing Gran Turismo 5 because they claimed its box-like UI structure was difficult to navigate and really confusing. I can't say I wholly disagree, but at least it was uniform enough that you rarely had to struggle to get to the box that you wanted to reach. The modern 360 interface is the exact same design, and yet critics adored the change. The thing is, since each page is full of different sized boxes, in different places on the 360, it's a confusing mess to navigate. I like the original interface, the blades, but it definitely could have done with some improving, so after a few years, they improved it. You know what's interesting? The improvement literally just turned it into a horizontal version of the PS3's cross-media bar. And you know what? I don't even care that it was a clone of the PS3 interface, because it was beautiful, elegant, and super easy to navigate. I loved that interface, and dare I say it was even better than the cross-media bar itself, because it used uniform icon design. And themes also never got in your way. Some themes and wallpapers on the PS3 are too bright for the font. Why'd they change the 360's UI to this Windows 8 inspired nonsense? To push Windows? Gimme a break. While the UI got worse with iteration, the console as a whole got better, but that's honestly only because it started in such a rushed and broken state. They were starting basically at zero. It was clearly released far too early. This helped the 360 succeed at first, but PS3 sales caught up eventually since people were tired of their 360s failing, among other reasons. To begin, the original 360 release came in two packages, the premium model with the 20GB hard drive and the core model with no hard drive. But did you also know that the core model didn't come with an HDMI port? Who thought that was a good idea? The whole point of designing a console that's going to stay the same for the next 5+ years is to future-proof it as much as your budget will allow. I don't care how low you wanted to drive the price of your base model console, not including HDMI was a stupid decision. The signs showing that HDMI was the future were plain as day. Though everyone seems to love the 360 controller, I found that it left a lot to be desired. The D-pad was terrible. The travel on the analog sticks was rather short. The triggers were pretty great, but the bumpers really didn't feel good with a lot of games, which again could have been solved by some uniformity in the design. Try playing Dark Souls on the 360 and then move to the PS3 controller, it's like night and day. The face buttons on the 360 don't have pressure sensitivity either, meaning the controls on games like the MGS collection are butchered. There are other extremely minor issues as well. The triggers are exhausting to press if you haven't played with that controller in a while. They start to squeak horribly over time, and I personally hate that the travel on them has a hard stop. I like the PS3's controller by comparison, where the triggers increase resistance as you pull further. It feels more gradual and less finite in travel. I also don't mind that they angle down rather than up. And the PS3 sticks have lighter resistance, allowing for more delicate precision. The face buttons on the 360 controller also aren't balanced well on the front plate of the controller because it's so rounded. Since the front plate isn't flat, the B button sticks out slightly further than the others, and since the buttons are convex, sliding between them feels awkward in some situations. But again, those are all extremely minor issues and more subjective than anything. Moving on, the hard drives for the 360 are excessively expensive. Why? Because they're all in proprietary casings. Honestly, a lot of the stuff on the 360 was either proprietary, or just not included when it should have been. So let's break this down. I, along with many other people, bought the 360 first because it was initially cheaper than the PS3. But was it really? If you got a premium 360, it would cost you $400. It came with a 20GB hard drive. The premium version of the PS3 was an insane $600, but it came with a 60GB hard drive. When the equivalent hard drive was released on 360, it cost $80 as far as I can tell, and you had to buy an Xbox branded hard drive. PS3s can use any properly sized hard drive that performs at the correct speed. The premium 360 couldn't do wireless internet without a network adapter. This adapter initially cost $100. The PS3 did it out of the box. The premium 360 needed a play and charge kit to get rechargeable controller power. These were $20. The PS3 did it out of the box, and the batteries were not proprietary, so they could be upgraded. The Premium 360 was Microsoft's defense of the HD DVD from the invading Blu-ray. However, it didn't come with an HD DVD reader inside, meaning games could only be on normal DVDs. Want to play HD DVD movies? You need a giant box that connects to your 360. That'll cost you $200. This monstrosity also made the console just about as big as the PS3, by the way, the size of which was a big point of contention back in the day. Anyway, PS3 plays Blu-rays out of the box, and used it for games as well. And that's saying nothing about the fact that Blu-ray is technically just the better form of physical media out of the two anyway. But, to be fair, that's not Microsoft's fault. Regardless, want to transfer files from one hard drive to another? You need the transfer cable, which I'm pretty sure was $25 new. It definitely didn't cost any less than that, but it might have cost more. While hard drive transfer is more complicated on the PS3, it doesn't require any proprietary anything. Want to just take singular files or profiles to a friend's house or to a new hard drive? Back then on the 360, you'd need a memory card, the cheapest of which was the 64MB one, which was $40. PS3 could use any USB flash drive. To be fair, the Premium 360 did come with 3 things the PS3 did not. Component cables, which would probably have cost around $20 at the time. A wireless headset, the equivalent of which probably would have been around $40 on PS3, and vibrating controllers, meaning another $50 to $60 if you wanted that. But still, if you tally it all up, a fully equipped 360 would cost you a whopping $865, where the PS3 would be $710. But that's still not factoring in the unpriceable things, like the freedom you would have in upgrading your hard drive, or upgrading the controller's battery, or the upsides of having games on Blu-ray, or the full hardware backwards compatibility of the initial PS3, or the fact that it had 4 USB slots as well as memory stick and SD card slots just in case, the fact that it had an internal power supply, etc. This nickel and diming on the part of Microsoft was, and still kind of is, a very Apple-esque thing to do. The PS3 was hugely expensive, for sure, but that's because it came fully prepared for the future, and dialed things back in later iterations as it became necessary. I don't think either approach is wrong, but the amount of things missing from the 360 that should have been there was staggering. The price of these things as peripherals often insane, and the reliability of them all pretty low. That is what made it feel wrong. Again, most of these extra pieces were all proprietary too, keep in mind, meaning you couldn't swap them out with something else. It took something like 4 or 5 years for Microsoft to even finally allow people to use flash drives in place of memory cards. Really? Come on. What about the design flaw Microsoft found with setting your 360 up vertically, despite the console being freaking designed specifically for that so that it looked like a desktop PC? Does anyone remember the panic when vertical 360s would randomly scratch rings into your games, rendering them unusable? Why would that ever be okay? Beyond this though, my relationship with the 360 only continued to crumble as I found out how they treated developers and consumers. Keep in mind, they are the ones who created the paywall for online services like online play for broad consumers rather than just a subscription fee to World of Warcraft. This is a paywall that any tech-savvy person will tell you is completely unjustified, and when Microsoft raised the price to $60 a year, their excuse was, well, someone has to pay for all the applications we're releasing, as if it's yours and my fault that they wasted time making a Facebook and Twitter app that nobody used, because smartphones were a thing by then. Though it's still disappointing that Sony eventually followed suit with their own online premium service, they at least took the initiative to give you other incentives like discounts and tons of free stuff, and it's still cheaper. I guarantee you Microsoft is only giving free games and other incentives because they wanted to keep up with Sony. By that point, they could feel the tides more than shifting. I also find it frustrating that I have to be connected to the internet in order to play Xbox Live indie titles I buy. If there's some reason that benefits the developers, then I'd like an explanation. I have no reason not to support developers if that's what it's doing. Otherwise, it's just an inconvenience unless you own a later model 360 with Wi-Fi connectivity built in, particularly when your 360 doesn't like to update. They also tended to treat developers rather poorly on the 360 anyway. For most of the 360's lifespan, it cost an arm and a leg to release updates on the console for your games, and it was rumored that developers were limited to releasing one update a month for some arbitrary reason. They claimed that all of this was to incentivize developers making finished games at release. A lot of help that did, and apparently there were some games like Minecraft that got exemptions to this, probably because they make Microsoft boatloads of cash. They supposedly got special rules that didn't include restrictions like that. Take that information with a grain of salt, of course. The only 100% confirmed part is that patches for a game outside of the first patch cost a large premium, which often meant that games went unfixed, which arguably made things worse than what they were intending. I think it cost money to patch on the PS3 as well, but I doubt it was near as high of a price for one rather large reason. Patches on the PS3 were much more frequent. That was kind of a running joke for a while even, where every time you tried to do anything on a PS3, something required an update. I don't think that'd be the case if their system was as costly and restrictive to update as Microsoft supposedly was. In the end, it's no surprise that the 360 went from having an enormous lead over the PS3 to the two competitors breaking even by the end. Sure, a large part of that is down to the PS3 continuing to provide a higher selection of diverse exclusives as its lifespan progressed, whereas the Xbox sort of sputtered out and died. But I also think people were tired of their Xboxes actually sputtering out and dying on a regular basis. Overall, I still enjoy my time with the 360, as I said, but the console frustrated me to no end. It was only my want to see gaming as a whole improve that made me let go of the anger I'd built up all that time. I learned to care more about focusing that energy in positive ways, because all these companies have issues that need improving. But there's one other factor that's really making Xbox look better in my eyes in recent years, and that's what we'll be discussing in the next editorial. So stay tuned for that next month, because I'm releasing a review before then.